Terrion Arnold, Detroit's starting cornerback, released this week on 8 felony charges, and Ryan Poles has exactly the pieces the Lions desperately need right now. Kyler Gordon, Tariq Stevenson, there is a real trade sitting on the table with your own division rival, but before you start celebrating, I am going to break down exactly why that move could cost Chicago a whole lot more than it looks. And while that is brewing, Deebo Samuel's name just got dropped on the Windy City. One analyst has him landing as a Bear. And honestly, the logic behind it is not as crazy as it sounds, because DJ Moore and Zacchaeus are gone, and those 9 red zone touchdowns walked out the door with them. But in a minute, I am going to tell you exactly why I think signing him would be a costly mistake for the monsters of the Midway. And the best news out of Hallas Hall today, Ben Johnson said on camera he's buying stock in Luther Burden III, and ESPN projections already have him sitting at 938 yards before the first whistle of the season. But there is one red zone stat that nobody is talking about that tells me that number is actually selling him short. And we close with the coldest story of the day. Kieran Amagaji, Ryan Poles' 3rd round pick, could be buried before training camp even kicks off. And the roster math simply does not work in his favor anymore. Bear down. Let's get into it. Before I get into the trade angle, I need to be straight with you about what actually happened here, because the way this story got framed downplays something serious. Terrion Arnold, Detroit's starting cornerback, was released Monday after being arrested on 8 felony charges connected to an armed robbery and kidnapping case in Tampa back in February. We're talking about charges that carry a potential life sentence. His bond was set at $1 million, and he's under home confinement except for team activities. I'm not going to speculate on guilt. That's for a courtroom to decide, not a football channel. But I will say this plainly, this isn't a simple roster decision. This is a legal crisis that forced Detroit's hand fast. Now, with that said, let's get into the football, because that's what matters for Sunday. Detroit just lost a starting corner heading into a season where they're division favorites again. And here's the interesting part. The Bears happen to have the exact inventory Detroit needs. Let's break down Chicago's real cornerback depth, because there are 3 names in play here, and each one tells a different story. Kyler Gordon is the first one. Ben Johnson's new staff has had real frustrations with Gordon's injury history. When healthy, he's a top-tier slot corner, one of the best at that specific role in the league. The problem is exactly that, staying healthy. If Detroit is more comfortable absorbing that medical risk than Chicago is, there's a real trade conversation there. And look at what the Bears already did in the draft. They took Malik Muhammad in round 4, and everything coming out of OTAs points to Muhammad taking over the slot job after his rookie season. That means moving Gordon isn't just about freeing cap space, it's also about committing to the player you drafted to replace him. That's classic Ryan Poles roster construction. You don't stockpile, you rotate. The second name is Tariq Stevenson, and this one's more complicated emotionally. Stevenson is in the final year of his rookie deal. The new coaching staff is literally the same group that drafted him, so they know exactly what they have. They tried benching him last year, but depth issues forced them to keep playing him anyway. That tells you everything. It wasn't trust, it was necessity. This year, with Jalen Johnson and Terrell Smith healthy, they actually have options. A player entering a contract year that the organization already tried to replace once is exactly the type of asset that gets moved before it loses value. The third name, Terrell Smith, is the lowest value piece, but also the easiest to move. He missed all of the 2025 season, has mostly been a depth player, and has no real connection to the current coaching staff. Chicago won't get much for him, but they don't need much either. It's simply about freeing up a roster spot for someone the new staff actually picked. Here's my real read on this, the one nobody else is giving you. If this trade happens, it isn't about desperation on either side. It's about timing. Detroit has a genuine emergency in the secondary weeks before camp. Chicago has real surplus at one of the few roster spots where they can afford to sell without weakening themselves. That's the exact scenario where a GM like Poles, who's constantly maximizing asset value, extracts a pick he'd never get in any other context. And here's the detail that changes the whole calculation. Detroit is a direct division rival. Normally teams avoid strengthening their closest competitors, but Detroit's urgency is real enough and Chicago's negotiating position strong enough that the division taboo can get broken here. If I'm Poles, I'm picking up the phone today. Not tomorrow. Today. Because the longer this drags out, the more open market options Detroit explores and the less desperate they get. My honest prediction, Gordon is the name most likely to move, simply because Muhammad is already ready to take over and because the injury history makes Chicago want to sell high now rather than watch the value erode. Stevenson sticks around, at least until the trade deadline, because there's still value in letting him compete for the job in camp before deciding his future. And Smith, honestly, could go for almost nothing just to clear a roster spot. Bear down on this one, but with your eyes open. The Bears division gets stronger off the back of a rival's worst week. Okay, this one's got me genuinely split, so let's treat it with the seriousness it deserves instead of as simple clickbait, because there's a real argument underneath it. An analyst from NFL Trade Rumors named the Bears as a landing spot for veteran receiver Deebo Samuel, who finished last season with Washington with 727 yards. And before anyone says this is ridiculous, let me explain why the underlying logic actually makes sense, even if the execution is a different conversation. Chicago traded DJ Moore to Buffalo this offseason. In terms of lost production, that's not just losing a receiver, that's losing 9 combined touchdowns and 15 combined red zone targets between Moore and Olamide Zacchaeus, who's also no longer on the roster. That production has to come from somewhere. And right now, Chicago's receiver room is Rome Odunze entering year 3, Luther Burden and Jade Walker with just 1 season of experience each, and Xavier Thomas, a third-round rookie, had Khalif Raymond, who came in through free agency, and Scotty Miller, who isn't even guaranteed a roster spot. See the problem? It's a group with sky-high ceiling, but 0 proven veteran depth. If Odunze goes down for 2 weeks, or if Burden hits a sophomore slump, there's no experienced safety net behind them. That's exactly what this analyst is pointing at, and honestly, it's a legitimate concern that keeps showing up across multiple separate articles, not just this one. Now, the fit itself. Samuel is a Swiss Army knife. He can line up outside in the slot, and he's even been used at running back at points in his career. Ben Johnson is a coach who loves versatile pieces. He can move around the formation to create mismatches. If Samuel accepts coming in as the third option, behind Odunze and Burden, in a reduced role with packages designed specifically around his skill set, that fits Johnson's offensive philosophy almost perfectly. The problem, like almost always, is money and ego. At 30 years old, coming off a 727-yard season, Samuel probably signs cheap, somewhere in the range of what Juwan Jennings got from Minnesota, 1 year around $8 million, with more incentives and less guaranteed money. Chicago has about $8.2 million in cap space right now. That technically covers it with some restructured gymnastics, but there's no room to spare. And here's my honest opinion. I don't think this happens in July. I think the Bears go into training camp, see what they actually have in Raymond and Thomas and Walker, let the pads come on and bodies collide, and only then evaluate whether they need an emergency veteran. Samuel could still be available by then, or he could wait it out to see if some team suffers a camp injury and offers him more money out of desperation. That's the logical play from his side too. So my prediction is, not now, possibly later. But the underlying issue this story is pointing at, the lack of real veteran depth behind Odunze and Burden, is valid, and it's something polls should be actively monitoring all summer. The question isn't whether they need Deebo Samuel specifically. The question is whether they need somebody with that exact profile. And now the part that genuinely has me excited about Bears football in 2026, because this story isn't outside analyst speculation. This is Ben Johnson himself on camera saying he's buying stock in Luther Burden III. Adam Schefter reported it directly back in late May. When a coach as methodical and tight-lipped as Johnson goes public with something like that, there's real weight behind it. Let's get to the concrete number, because this is what actually convinced me. ESPN's Mike Clay put out his stat projections for Chicago's receivers. Odunze over 1,000 yards, Burden at 938, Loveland at 868 yards with 6 touchdowns. That's a fully fed trio with no clear weak link. That's exactly the kind of offense that terrifies defensive coordinators, because there's no spot where you can comfortably hand off coverage. But the truly interesting number, the one almost nobody's digging into deep enough, is the red zone usage. As a rookie, Burden ran 231 routes, and of those, only 28 came inside the 20-yard line. Of those 28, he had 4 targets, 4, and 0 touchdowns in that area. Both of his touchdowns last season came from explosive downfield plays, not from work near the end zone. Clay explains it with a stat I think is key. Players who score fewer than 3 touchdowns on 50 or more touches tend to see a jump in year 2. Burden had 53 touches as a rookie. He fits that profile exactly. And the reason that jump is almost automatic for him in 2026 is simple. Moore and Zacchaeus, no longer on the roster, combined for 9 touchdowns and 15 red zone targets last season. That production has to go somewhere. And with his frame, 6 foot, 210 pounds, with a knack for breaking tackles and fighting for extra yards, Burden is exactly the kind of receiver Johnson can scheme bubble screens and tunnel screens for near the goal line, letting him break a tackle or two and walk in. Now, I'll be honest about something this story doesn't mention, but matters to me. A coaching staff's trust isn't built with words alone. It's built with real game reps. Burden had to earn that spot through his entire rookie season, and it was only when injuries forced the staff to use him more that he exploded into that 1,000-yard pace over the final 8 weeks we already broke down in earlier episodes. The difference this year is he doesn't need someone else's injury to get on the field. He walks in as a day one starter, with Johnson openly saying he's going to look for ways to get the ball in his hands. My position? No hedging. I think Burden finishes 2026 with more than 5 touchdowns. Easy. Clay says it himself, and I completely agree. And I think the whole WR1 versus WR2 conversation between him and O'Dunn's becomes irrelevant fast, because Johnson's going to design a system where both of them are simultaneous problems that can't be solved at the same time. When a defense can't double one receiver without exposing the other, that's where the best offenses in the league live. And Chicago, fam, is building exactly that. We close with a story that isn't hype. It's cold roster construction reality. And the honest question I have to ask is direct. Do you remember Kieran Amagaji? They drafted him in the 3rd round out of Yale after 2 seasons at left tackle following a position switch from guard. The idea made sense at the time. Versatile offensive lineman, real need up front, reasonable, day 2 investment. We're heading into year 3 of that pick now, and the honest question worth asking is whether it ended up being a wasted one. When Ben Johnson arrived, one of the first moves the new front office made was fortifying the guard position by trading for Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson. That closed off any path for Amagaji to compete at guard. Meanwhile, there's an open competition for left tackle happening right now, and Amagaji isn't even part of that conversation. And here's where it gets genuinely rough for him. The depth behind Thuney and Jackson at guard includes Jordan McFadden and Luke Newman, last year's 6th round pick, both with real game experience, because Amagaji missed most of the 2025 season due to injury. At center, Chicago keeps Garrett Bradbury and Logan Jones. Do the math with me here. That's 6 interior linemen with a real argument for a roster spot, not even counting tackles. And at tackle, they still have Ozzie Trapilo coming back from injury, Theo Benedette, Braxton Jones, and even Jedrick Wills competing. Darnell Wright already has the right side locked down. There's no math that works in Amagaji's favor. He's not in the guard competition. He's not in the tackle competition. And the depth behind him at both spots is more experienced and healthier than he is. My honest take, no filter. This is exactly the kind of tough evaluation Ryan Poles has to make every roster cycle. Not every pick works out. That's part of the game. The difference between an average GM and a good one isn't avoiding misses. It's recognizing them fast and not clinging to a pick out of pride once the return is gone. If Amagaji doesn't show something dramatically different in camp, he's going to be one of the first cuts. And honestly, with the depth they've built on the line, the team won't even feel it. And that's everything I've got for you today, fam. 4 stories, 4 completely different angles on the same reality. This roster is still alive, still changing, and Ryan Poles is still making decisions every single day that are going to define whether 2026 is the year this franchise actually takes the leap. We've got a chance to take a piece off a division rival at their most vulnerable moment. We've got a free agency rumor that, while not imminent, exposes a real depth concern at receiver. We've got Luther Burden III, about to become a red zone nightmare with Ben Johnson himself backing him on camera. And we've got the uncomfortable reality that not every draft pick survives all the way to training camp. This is what I love about following this team closely. There are no boring weeks. Bear down, always. If this video gave you something, smash that like button, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments, would you make the trade with the Lions for Kyler Gordon, or do you hold onto the depth? I want to read every single answer. See you in the next one.